Alright, so in this video we're gonna talk about preparing and saving images for the web. Now this is a topic that I'm sure most of you have dealt with at some point. Some of you might still be struggling with it, so hopefully this video will explain everything you need to know. Not only the problems, but also how to avoid them or minimize them. Before I continue, I just want to point out that color management in terms of web is all about managing the appearance of color. Not so much the color available within the image. That's something we're more concerned while editing and while printing. In terms of web, it's more about the appearance. In other words, in layman terms, we want to make sure that the image we were working on and saw in Photoshop or Lightroom is as close as possible to that when we post it online. And we also want to make sure that we have done our job so that we see other people's images the way they're quote-unquote intended to be seen. What I mean by that? Well, you can't go around town or around the world putting gun to other people's head and say, color manage your workflow, you know, have a calibrated and profile monitor, proper ambient lighting, tag your images, and use color managed applications. You can't do that. What you can do, however, is make sure that you are using all of that so that you can view other people's images according to the color management workflow, color management standards, the way they're intended to be seen, and also that when you are saving images, you're making sure that everybody who respects the standards of color management sees them the way they're intended to be seen. That's all you can do. Color management and web don't go hand by hand, so we say that web by and large is uncolor managed. However, you can do certain things to improve your chances of viewing images properly and preparing them properly. This video is all about that. I will explain problems and then I will explain how to prepare your images. Okay, so let's start. I have here an open image the website. This is my profile at Model Mayhem, and what I wanted to show you is the way the images look online right now. Okay, so I'll go to my profile and I will open up, let's say, this image, and as you can see, this image looks the way you see it here, and that's the way it should look. Now let me open up the same website, same everything, inside of Chrome, and I'm going to be opening up this inside of the latest, most popular browsers, just to make a point. So we are now here in Chrome. This is the latest version of Chrome, and as we can see, we have a problem. It looks, unlike here in Firefox, in Chrome it looks much more saturated, much more reddish, kind of looks awful. This is now in Safari for Windows, same issue. These are our latest browsers, and it doesn't matter if they're latest or not, the same problem happens in the earlier versions. And we have finally Internet Explorer 10, same issue, right? Now let's go back to Firefox. So why is Firefox showing this properly? Well, that's because it is rendering all of the graphics anywhere on the website according to color managed standards. According to the profile, it's reading a profile from the from my calibrated and profile monitor, and it's compensating to show the proper image. Every other browser doesn't do that, but they do partial work. Let me show you. This is my website and we have the same image. Okay, now let's go to Chrome and open up the same website. Now all of a sudden, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and Internet Explorer. So wait a minute, what's going on, right? Firefox displays it properly, Chrome displays it properly, Safari displays it properly, Internet Explorer misses the target. So what's the difference this time? The difference this time is that here on Model Mayhem, the Model Mayhem website have stripped away the embedded sRGB profile that I had inside of an image. Here on my website, I'm controlling everything. There's no third party stripping away any profile, right? So I have prepared an image properly for the web and I have posted it online. Now, unfortunately, I have to post my images both on the Model Mayhem, Facebook, and other places, as well as my website. So if I take a look at here, even though I'm using Chrome, here doesn't, the same image without the profile looks really bad. With the profile it displays properly. Same is true for Safari, but Internet Explorer is just illiterate in terms of color management. So what does that mean? Well, that means that Firefox is the only fully color managed application of all the browsers. Chrome, Safari are half color managed. In other words, they can display image properly if there is a profile embedded inside of an image. If there is no profile, they won't display it properly. And Internet Explorer is totally off target. It's missing everything. It has no color management whatsoever, which is interesting considering that it's supposed to be, not sure now, but for a long time it was the most popular web browser. So let's go back to Firefox. So what else can I before I continue, I want to show you this doesn't just apply to images, like photographs, but it's also true for the graphics of anything online. This is a Google famous browser page, and this is their logo. This is on Firefox. Let's see. Oops. Let's see on the Chrome, and as you can see, this is the way it looks on Chrome. This is the way it looks on Firefox. Chrome, Firefox, Chrome, Firefox. What you're seeing is that here it looks the way it should look on Firefox. On Chrome, again, it looks way oversaturated. And the same is true for the Safari as well as Internet Explorer. What that means is that, well, it means that anything that doesn't have embedded profile, that means all the graphics you see on websites, as well as most images that don't have that profile or have been stripped away by some website, will display in a non-color managed way. And I can show you also the same thing is true for such as a website like this one. This is a BBC website, right? And as you can see, take a look at this red color here inside of their logo and so on. And this is on every browser, including this was on Internet Explorer, very saturated, very red. This is on Safari, and this is on Chrome, same thing, and this is now on Firefox. So this is any other browser, this is Firefox, displaying it properly, right? So this is a proof that Firefox is the only browser that can display properly everything. How does it do? Well, you have to activate this option. It doesn't come by default. You have to tell Firefox to render not just images that have embedded profiles inside, but every graphic that you see online, that it renders properly. So what I'm trying to say is that this is the part where you not only have to prepare images for the web, but also it's about using the proper browser, which is color managed, and I'm assuming that you will have a calibrated and profile screen, that only then can you display properly all the graphics. But there's one very important but. You see if I go to this image, and let's open the same thing in any other browser, and this time we'll use Chrome. You see, this is the way it should look, and this is the way it looks. It's very, very saturated. So the question is, why it's so saturated? Well, I happen to be using a wide gamut monitor. Now every image online in most monitors fall into category of sRGB color space, which is like a standard color space. And then we have about, I don't know, 30-40%, 30% or something like that, the Adobe RGB, which is that much bigger, can display more saturated colors. Well, my monitor falls in that wider gamut range. And as a result, well, every time it cannot read properly the profile from the image, it defaults to whatever the gamut of the monitor is, which is closer to Adobe RGB. So what it does, it uses an sRGB image, which assumes it's an sRGB, and then it stretches it out to fit into the larger color space. which is Adobe RGB. And result of that is this. Now, if you're using a standard gamut monitor, then you wouldn't have this issue. Why? Well, you would have, still a problem with not color managed browser, but it wouldn't default to Adobe RGB. It will default to sRGB. I'll show you later what I mean by that in a more visual manner, so you'll get a better sense. So now that you see how these browsers work, okay, now let's go to Photoshop for 1 second. And this is this image that you see here. This is the image from this website, from Model Mayhem, right? And I saved it the way you see it here in browser, and it's just way oversaturated, very red. And I just saved it on my desktop, opened it up inside of Photoshop, and what it says is untagged. There is no profile to it, and yet it displays properly. Now, why is that? Well, Photoshop is using what have I set here to be a working profile under Edit and Color Settings, or Shift-Control-K. Now, if I opened up this dialog box, I can see that I have set my working space here to sRGB. And it just so happens that this was originally saved image in sRGB, so one and the other matches. However, this is the original image that I've saved as sRGB, and here's an interesting point about this. If I go back to the untagged one, so it doesn't have any profile, I can try to assign profile. I can try to tell Photoshop what do I think it should do. And this will illustrate what's going on with wide versus standard gamut monitors. So I'll go to Edit and Assign Profile, and this will only change the appearance. It won't do anything to the image itself. Okay, so I'll switch to Profile to whatever my monitor profile was, and what you'll see is this was the original, right? sRGB rendering, and this is based on my profile for the monitor. Now let me go to the Chrome web browser, and you'll see that one color matches the other. So that's what happens, right? This was the sRGB original inside of image, and then it stretched it out to fit whatever wider gamut monitor profile I had, and this is it. That's why I get these really weird colors. Now let's say I'm using a different monitor, and I have here a profile of a different monitor, and this is more of a standard gamut monitor, something that most of you would be using. And as a result, here's what happens. Look at the image before and after. What we're seeing is a color shift, but it's nowhere near as bad as on a wide gamut monitor, right? So sometimes people use these monitors in non-color managed browsers, for example Internet Explorer, Chrome, or whatever, and the shift in color is so minute, sometimes it's smaller than this, that they don't really have an issue with color shifts, which is good news for us if we are preparing images for other people. It's bad news for us if we're trying to view other people's images on a wide gamut monitor. So if you happen to be using a wide gamut monitor, the only possible solution you have is to use a color managed application and fully color managed, such as Firefox. In fact, Firefox is the only browser that can do it. So let me show you what you can do to avoid this issue on a wide gamut monitor, and if you want accurate representation of color on any monitor. Okay, so what you will do is you would go into Firefox, and Firefox by default is acting just like a Chrome or Safari. It uses only profiles within the images to display images properly. If there's no profile embedded, it doesn't show you anything. It just shows you this really weird looking color, depending on what your monitor is. Okay, so how do you avoid that? Well, there are many ways to do it, but basically you have to tell Firefox to render all graphics, not just the tagged images, properly, based on your profile for the monitor. And how do you do that? Well, you go to Google, and Google for Configuration Mania Firefox add-on. There are others that you can use, but I prefer this one for several reasons. So go to their website and add to Firefox configuration mania. And once you're done, reset your Firefox, and basically what it does, it allows you to access all these advanced features within Firefox using a graphical user interface. So once you've done that, by the way, if you're using Firefox and you're wondering why it looks a bit different than yours, that's because I'm using a custom theme for Firefox and I have customized it in every possible way. It's just the way I like to work. But the underlying engine and everything is just the same as yours. And I'm using a theme here. It's called Australis theme, and it's the new theme that will ship with, officially with Firefox later on. Right now it might look different. Also, you might have an orange button that says Firefox here, and you can access options from that. I have put that button here in a different format, but it's the same button. I would click on that and then go to options, wait it until it opens, and go to configuration mania. That's the Firefox add-on we just installed. And if you click on that, it will open up a dialog box with so many different options, not even funny. But the ones we're looking at would be under page control. And here it says color management CMS takes effect after restart. And you can set different modes. And you have 3 modes. You can disable it. This will act like Internet Explorer. It will be deaf, dumb, and stupid. You can choose this one, enable for rendered graphics. This is only for everything. This is what I have now. This will render anything that's graphical on except Flash. Anything will be rendered using a profile for your monitor, and everything will display properly. And you can choose this one, enable for tagged graphics only. And if you choose that one, that will be just like using a Chrome or Safari, or I'm not sure about Opera. There's another famous browser. The reason I'm not showing it here is because in terms of user base it's very small, even though it's a good browser. So I thought, it's the same principle as here, but I don't think it's color managed either. So you would use here under these settings, it would probably by default be set to this. This is true for all Firefox versions from 3.5 onwards, I believe. I'm using Firefox 20 right now. And you can set this to enable for rendered graphics. You set that and you click OK, and then you would restart your Firefox. And after that, providing that you have calibrated your monitor, it will show all of the graphics properly. The only thing that doesn't show properly is Flash. So if you have Flash website or Flash content, it will not display it properly because it's a different type of graphic. It uses its own plugin, right? A Flash plugin. Now, I'm not a web designer or anything like that, but I believe that you can activate color management within your Flash content. But most web designers and everybody doesn't do it. So if you're, let's say, a photographer or retoucher and you're paying somebody or you're building your own website in Flash, make sure that they activate color management. There's got to be some option in the code that says, activate color management or something like that. And if you have that activated, and then you will be able to use color managed applications, even Firefox, to display that. So that would be my recommendation. Okay. So let's go to Photoshop once again, and let's see now that we have understanding of what the problem is, let's see how we can prepare our images for the web so that they are properly viewed. I'll open up an image like this. Now let's say you're working on your image and you're done retouching, and this is now a PSD file, and it has a bunch of stuff here, a bunch of layers and things like that, right? Also, you will notice down here that it's Adobe RGB, so it's not really it's only for editing and preparing for print. It's not ideal for the web. The golden standard profile for the web is sRGB, standard RGB. So use that anytime you're posting and preparing anything for web. So in order to show this image in terms of color properly on the web, we need several things. First of all, we need proper color managed applications such as Firefox, calibrated screen, calibrated monitor. We need to activate that color management inside of Firefox the way we showed you. And you need to prepare images properly, or somebody else has to. if you embed profile inside your images, then even people who are not using Firefox but are using Safari or Chrome, because it's a tag image, will be able to display it properly. We saw that. Okay, so here's what you do. Actually, here's what I do. Now, you can go to File and go to Save for Web. If you're using older versions of Firefox, of Photoshop, sorry, this might say here Save for Web and Devices. By devices, they usually mean mobile devices. If you click on that, it will open up this dialog box, but here's the problem. When you click on that, because this is a big image, first of all, it will try to render all the graphics and everything, and it's going to take some time, and then if you do something to it, it's going to just take a lot of time. Another problem that I don't like about this is that, well, Photoshop, unfortunately, since they introduced, I think it was Photoshop CS4, they introduced GPU rendering, or using a graphic card to render graphics on screen. So that will mean that every time you zoom in or out, what's going on really is that it's using a GPU, graphic accelerator, your graphic card, to render all the pixels. And if you are here zoomed to anything but whole numbers, something like, let's start with 100%. So if you're on 100%, that's good. If you're on 50%, it's going to render everything properly. If you're on, I believe, 25%, it's going to render everything properly. But if you're on something wacky like 16.67, like we have here, it will give you a bit of a soft image look. So it won't give you a proper rendition of detail. And because of this reason, what I like to do is I like to go on Image, Duplicate, and duplicate merge layers only. This will flatten the file and duplicate it, open it up as a new document. And I do this only for the web purposes, okay? So this is a temporary thing I do. And I'll click OK. This will open up an image now as a duplicate, and it will be flattened. In fact, I can right click and completely flatten the image so that it's just like a saved JPEG. Okay, now that we have that, now what I would do is I would go to Image and Image Size. And here I would resize the image to whatever I will be posting online. Now let's say it's a 700 pixels width, or let's put it 1000 pixels width. Now I have here activated this option to basically lock the settings, and if I change that to any number, you can see that the height also changes. And this is because I'm keeping the aspect ratio. Now I'm not squishing the image in any way. Exactly what I want. So I'll do that here. Also, basically, let me give you a brief overview of this dialog box, image size. And so basically we have pixel dimensions, this section here. Then you have document size. This is only for print, so we're not concerned when we're saying for web about this at all. And you have scale styles. We don't have any layers or styles, so that doesn't matter. We have constraint proportions. We do matter about that. That's for aspect ratio. If you deactivate that, as you can see, those keychains, they go away. And you have resample image. Well, if you deactivate resample image, that controls only this section for the print. We're not printing, so we don't care about that. We want to resample image. By the way, when you're resampling anything like an image, what you're doing is you're recalculating every single pixel within the image. Based on these algorithms, it will rearrange pixels inside your image. Now in this case, this is something we want to, especially if you're downsampling, then you're throwing away pixels. If you're upsampling, if you're resizing to a bigger file, more pixel dimensions, then basically Photoshop has to figure out how do I add more pixels. Then it tries to interpolate how to do that, and you can tell it here what algorithm to do that. It's kind of guesswork. When you're downsampling, you usually don't have that issue because it has more pixel than it needs to, and it's going to a less number, so it's throwing away a bunch of pixels. And that's what you do here. Okay, so resample image would be on. I would set this to 1000 pixels, constraint proportions, and this would be my kind of a version of the file. Now here you can change between different options. Nearest neighbor, this is not something you would, maybe if you have a line art or something, it's very not useful for anything else. Bilinear, very old version, not very good for what we're trying to do. Bicubic, it's better than bilinear. is an algorithm, and it says best for smooth gradients. Maybe if you have them or something like that, but in this case what we're going to try to do is one of these two, or potentially this one, this third one. This is the automatic one. So if you're downsampling, it should switch automatically to this one. If you're upsampling, it will switch to this one. Well, in this case, I don't normally use this all the time, but when I'm sometimes downsampling, I'm also applying this one. Now this one will do, it will use the bicubic algorithm to throw away pixels and retain the others, and it will also apply a little bit of sharpening. You don't know how much and you can't control it, but that's what it would do. It will apply a little bit of sharpening. Now you don't want to do this always, but here's when I believe it's a good idea. Sometimes you just want to add more sharpening, and this seems to be a setting that works just fine. Other times you might be posting your image on a website such as Facebook and some other websites, and let's say that you haven't resized to the dimensions that Facebook likes. You have made a bigger file, a bigger pixel dimensions. What Facebook and some other websites, special social media stuff and things like that, what they tend to do is they tend to resample your image themselves. And typically they don't use sharper one, so they use a smoother one, and they soften your image more than you would like. So this is a way to compensate for that as well. Other option is that you use best for enlargement. That won't sharpen it, and then you just click OK. By the way, resolution doesn't matter. This is only for print. It does not matter for web, and don't let people convince you otherwise, because this is probably the oldest myth there is in Photoshop, and usually people talk about 72 and things like that, but trust me, it does not matter. You can change this to anything you want as long as you don't have this resample option on. So now I can change this to whatever I want. These options will change, but we're not printing this, so it doesn't matter. I can say this to 1 if I want to, and won't change a bit. If I have resample on, then when you change this, the pixel dimensions change as well. Okay, so I don't know if I can go back. I can, so I'll click cancel and I'll go to image size again. So, this was the original. Alright, so I'm gonna again reduce this to 1000 pixels for width. Constraint proportions, this will also keep the aspect ratio and reduce this one for me. Here I would choose bicubic smoother for enlargement. Also these kind of descriptions here, they're not available in all the versions of Photoshop. They introduced that recently. And I'll click OK. And I'll zoom this to 100% now. And now I can see just how sharp and how properly rendered the image is. At this point, if I want to, I can apply filter sharpening, say smart sharpen, and apply sharpening as much as I want. Now let's say I want to maybe apply this sharpening because I want a little bit more sharper image, and maybe I want to upload it to Facebook or somewhere, and it's gonna be it's gonna be resampled by their standards. So let's keep that like this. Another thing that you want to do is, if you're doing this kind of work all the time and you want to use, if you remember, if I go to image size, here it's set to automatic by default, so it will choose the one for you. So if you want to use one all the time and don't let Photoshop decide this for you, go to Edit, or Photoshop if you're on Mac, Preferences, General, and here under Settings, Preferences, Image Interpolation, you can set it to anything that you would like to appear there in that image size dialog box as default. Okay, so whatever you're using all the time, set it up here. Okay, so this is what I would do, and in fact I think this is too much sharpening, so I'll go to Edit, Undo. Now let's say this is the image I want, right? So now I have prepared it in terms of pixel dimensions. The next step, and I have flattened it, and I want to make sure that I don't have any alpha channels or anything like that. Now once I'm done, now I want to basically change this. Okay, now I can do this manually, or I can let Photoshop do it for me. If I want to change this, and this is now Adobe 98 RGB 98, that's the profile for this image. If I were to save this image online the way it is now, then on my monitor on an uncolor managed application will display properly or close to it. Otherwise it will be very bad for most other people. And if you're using ProPhoto for editing here and you save it, ProPhoto RGB, and you save it like that and send it up onto web, you're gonna get some really crazy color shifts. In fact, I can show you what's gonna happen, at least on my monitor. If I go to View and Proof Setup, here I can basically soft proof or simulate how it would look. If I switch to Internet Standard, what I'm gonna get is this. Now the reason why I didn't go very red and saturated, unlike this one, which this is an sRGB, right? So if I go to Image, Proof Setup, Internet Standard, it goes really wacky. Now in case you're wondering why that is it because it's using my profile of the monitor and the sRGB and it's kind of blending them together to give you this really weird effect. Monitor RGB will use the profile from my monitor. And if we open up this browser in Safari, we can see that it really matches that color, right? So if I go here and if I choose under Proof Setup Monitor RGB, this is what I'm gonna get. It's nothing gonna change except a little bit. You can see that it's more yellowish here, right? And if I change that to proof colors, it goes a little bit less yellowish. That's it. So a change because why? Because well, my monitor is close to Adobe RGB, and here we have RGB already as a color, so the color shift isn't that big. So if you were to save this as the way it is now and send it off to web, and somebody's not using a wide gamut monitor and non-color managed application, then the color shift will be much more extreme. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, I can go to, actually before I do, let me save this in history. So I'll just save here our new snapshot. Image size, okay. Actually not image size, let's save it duplicate state. Okay. So here's what's gonna happen. Here's what I can do. I can go to Edit and I can go to Convert Profile, and now I'm going to change what's going on with the data within the image, and I can change this to sRGB because that's the internet standard. What's going to happen is that you're not going to see any color shifts. So the first thing I want to do is convert to profile, right? And here I can choose between different rendering intents if you're used to doing this for the print version. But just so you know, if you're using sRGB or any of these profiles like Adobe RGB, ProPhoto, whatever, simple profiles, then intent doesn't really matter. It will always use relative colorimetric. But if you're converting profile for, let's say, CMYK profile or something like that, or for prepress or anything like that, then the rendering intent does matter. Otherwise, it's always relative colorimetric. So all you have to do here is profile set to sRGB. Okay? I'll click OK. Now it should shift to sRGB as it did. And now what I want to make sure that I do on top of that is just to make sure, I'll go to Edit, Assign Profile, and I'm going to assign Working Profile. In this case it's sRGB, otherwise I would choose it here, and click OK. So what I've done now is I've resized the image, I have converted it to sRGB, and I have assigned sRGB on top of that, just to make sure. And now if I post this online, everything will work just fine. Okay? Now let's go one step back. Let's go to where we just resized the image, nothing more, and we're still in Adobe RGB. So the first version I showed you, that's basically the version that I can do it manually. Now let's allow Photoshop to do it for us. Much simpler way. This is the way I do it. I would go to File, Save As, Save for Web, and maybe it says Save for Web and Devices if you're an older version of Photoshop. So you would choose Save for Web, and here I would choose from file format from this to JPEG. Under quality, I can set it to very high. 80, that's for compression for JPEG. It's usually okay. And here's the really interesting part. It says convert to sRGB. So it does that step for us. And I say embed color profile. It will do that for us. Now, so it will convert, embed, it will optimize, save it in a different format, does everything for us. And here, if we wanted to, we can also introduce copyright. So if you want to copyright your images. And you can also include a preview here. Now let's say we want internet standard RGB no color management. This is the one I typically choose, and because I know I'll be using Firefox properly managed, I can see it being the same as the one here, right? If I want to use the document profile, nothing will change because I'm using embed color profile, so it will use sRGB to display the image. If I use monitor color, then it will display it based on my monitor. It will just kind of stretch that sRGB to Adobe RGB. We saw that. So what I really want to use here is internet standard RGB and preview this. Also down here, of course, I can reduce the size of this, and I can also choose my browser and click preview, and it will open up in that particular browser. And here, what else I can do? Well, I can size the image based on pixel dimension, just like we did before, and we can also change this between different, if you remember, interpolation options. We can just reduce it in terms of percentages. So what you'll see here is that it nowhere in any shape and form, and this is like the ultimate save for web dialog box, right? It was prepared specifically to prepare images for web. And as you can see, there's nowhere dimension or resolution. Nobody mentions document size or resolution because that's only for print. So this is another situation where it just confirms what I told you before. Resolution does not matter for internet use, only for print. Since I already done this here, I mean in the previous step, I didn't do it here. The reason why I did it in the previous step is because, let me cancel out of that. Let me go to the original big file, right? If I go to save and then save for web, it usually has a lot of layers and stuff, so it takes forever for this dialog box to reflect any changes that I make here. And I want to do it in a more quicker way, so that's why I use a different copy. And also I want to resize it while I'm inside of Photoshop like this, so I can see if I made any problems with the color. Remember, I want to see this on 100% or any of those, 50 or 25%, and I want to make sure that I'm not missing any, that I don't have any blurry details and things like that. I might also want to add sharpening here. So because of those reasons, I do sharpening and image sizing in a separate document, and then the color stuff I do save for web. That way I get best of both worlds. So again, I'll choose here JPEG, very high, everything else is set the way it should. And now once I'm done with this, I will just click save. And I'm done. All I have to do after that is upload the image to whatever I want. So that's all that I would do. Now let's kill this image and let's go back to one where we have a bunch of layers and stuff. So let me show you one more time how I do it more quickly. You can create an action for this. So what I do is I've created an action, and one of the actions here is that it basically duplicates the image and resizes it for width to 700 pixels. I usually do that because, well, sometimes I'm using a lot of images that have a portrait orientation, so 700 works out fine for that. This is not a portrait, this is a landscape orientation, so 1000 might work better, but it doesn't matter, the principle is the same. So you create an action for this and we'll just play back that, and what it'll do is it will do everything for me, right? It resized the image to 700 pixels, it get rid of all the different layers and stuff. It didn't flatten it, but it doesn't need to because this is only a temporary file. So once I have that, even though it's still in Adobe RGB and all that, I don't care. So first step will be to just do what I just did, just to check everything. and then I would go to save for web, and usually I have a preset here already set to JPEG. If you saved it, it will remain to whatever you saved it last, right? Everything else remains the same, and I'll click the save. That's it. After that, I can open it up inside of any browser except Internet Explorer, and it will, based on this embedded profile here, which I didn't include right now, but I mean embedded profile and convert to sRGB, all that will be on, and pretty much that's it. If you don't want any metadata, you can just none, copyright. You can even create your own templates. Here, color table. Well, that's if you're using let's say a GIF file, then you can basically take just reduce some of the colors to reduce the file size. Otherwise, for JPEG, it doesn't matter. So this is what I would do basically, and that's the whole process. So I would use this save for web to convert and embed color profiles. That should always be on. Those are the two most important things for everything. And it's always sRGB for the web, never something like ProPhoto or Adobe RGB, unless you're using it for some really particular purpose on a specific website. And that's about it. Also, let me go into Bridge for 1 second. Now let's say you have a lot of images that you want to do the same thing, and you want to batch process images. Well, in Bridge, what you can do is you can go to Tools, select a bunch of images. Let's say I want to select a few images. Tool, Photoshop, and then you would go to Image Processor. And this will use basically Photoshop as the main processing engine, and it will allow you to save some stuff, like save for JPEG, right? Certain quality and all that, but it doesn't allow you all that many options, really. You can include ICC profile, but it will use the one from the document itself. So if you're using a PSDs and you're converting like this, it doesn't really help that much, right? You can also use run action and then create a specific action for your own convert to web and all that stuff, but it's quite complicated. Better option is to simply go to Google and Google for Russell Brown, and here go to Russell Brown show and go to Dr. Brown scripts, and he's one of the people working on, I don't know, he's got a certain role inside of Adobe for a very long time, but he's a really cool guy. So here under his different scripts, and scripts are basically like more complex version of actions for Photoshop, right? So go here, go to this scripts on his website and choose this one, Dr. Brown Service Installer, and actually no, this is the one you want, right? Image Processor Pro. Install that, and now once you're done, go to Bridge and go to Tools, and here you will see Dr. Brown Services, a bunch of stuff. We want Image Processor Pro. When I click on that, similar type dialog box should appear, but this time we see a lot more options. In fact, we can now set the output profile here. We can run actions just like we did before. We can do all sorts of resizing and stuff, and we also have remove preview and metadata for reduced file size. So we also have this one. When you click on that, it will give you a warning, script alert. Save for web will reduce the file size by removing the preview and some metadata from your images. This option will automatically set the resolution of the default value for 72 pixels. I don't know why he would say that, but okay. So you can add save for web here, or you can just output profile sRGB. So all of that will do the job for you if you have a lot of files, and will just speed up the workflow. If you have like batch processing file, maybe you're doing weddings or something, this might be useful. If you are Lightroom user, however, and I'm now in Lightroom, then you can also use Lightroom for batch processing. So let's say I have a bunch of images here and I want to prepare them for the web, right? Well, I would go to File and Export after I have selected my images. Here, export to hard drive, export location wherever I want to export them, file naming if I want to rename them, video nothing, file settings, image format I want JPEG, about 80% for quality, that works fine. I want color space sRGB. That's important, right? So definitely sRGB. And then image sizing, here on the resolution I don't have to set anything, and I can maybe resize them to something, maybe a long edge to 1000 pixels. And that's pretty much it. I can apply even sharpening here, but usually it's not very controlled, so I may not want to. But if you want to, you can set it to screen and different papers and so on. Standard, low, maybe set it to low. That might work. Metadata, you can set up your own metadata if you have any, or you can just use the regular one. Watermarking, you can even watermark your images depending if you want that. Post-processing, this is just what to do after export. And that's it. So once you would have all those settings, remember I would just set this to, right, image settings to JPEG, sRGB 80, image sizing to resize to fit, long edge, and then whatever I want. If this is what I want to really resize them, maybe I already have them resized or whatever. Resolution for web doesn't matter, so pretty much I'm ready. I would click export. You can also additionally add this as a preset for web if you're doing this on regular basis. And that's pretty much it. This is the way you would prepare your images for the web, and I hopefully you now understand what is going on with your images. So just make sure that using Firefox that you have activated your color management for rendered graphics. Make sure that you have a calibrated monitor so you can properly see and view images. Make sure that your images and everything is also prepared so that they have you have converted them to sRGB from whatever profile you're working with. You embedded the sRGB profile inside, and you have resized and sharpened and all that stuff that you need for web. Another thing to point out is that a lot of websites, especially social media type websites such as Facebook and so on, they tend to sometimes resample your images, so you need to account for that. You need to know what they're doing, so you can maybe apply more sharpening so that when they resample an image you lose some of the sharpening, so that you kind of at the end up with a sharp image despite Facebook downsizing them. And also a lot of the website will strip, third-party websites will strip down your profiles, and there's nothing you can do about that really, or except post images where you know that your profile will be intact. And because of all this, we say web is by and large uncolor managed. But I guess that's the best you can do. You can set up your images to in a proper environment, such as let's say a website, and you embed profiles, you do everything you need to, and then on top of that you can also you should also make sure that you have calibrated your monitor and the proper viewing conditions and everything, so that you're viewing other people's images hopefully as the way they're intended them to be seen. If you're using a wide gamut monitor, then the problems with color, as we saw, as you remember here, the problems with color would be very, very pronounced. So to avoid that, use color managed applications. The only one that's fully color managed from browsers is Firefox, so use that. Also, if you're preparing images and saving for mobile devices, maybe an iPhone or iPad or something like that, make sure that those images are also prepared the same way, and whatever happens on those devices, not much you can do. Most devices will be, I guess, I'm not sure, but I think they're also something like sRGB based, so there shouldn't be that big of a deal if you prepare your images for sRGB type viewing conditions. I know that you can actually somehow calibrate and profile your iPad and iPhone using Calibrator, but I'm not sure if you can use color managed browser. I know you can use Safari and you can use Chrome, for example, but chances are they're not color managed. You can use Firefox on Android type devices, I believe, but I'm not sure if they support color management for mobile devices. So again, out of your hands. Just don't worry about it. Do your best and forget the rest. So pretty much that's about it. Hopefully you will now have a better understanding of how to prepare your images, what to look for, and you should have no big problems that you might have had in the past.